It's funny because we've all watched the media turn information into entertainment, right? We have watched, reality TV infiltrate our politics. And I'm, of course, the resident pessimist on this show and just in life, because I believe that the media, regardless of broadcast or cable, that their coverage of politics is purposeful. I believe that they are purposefully providing a lack of context and information to the public because it doesn't serve their bottom line. And I also think that when we think about who is directing these newsrooms, who is sitting in the C-suites, does it matter to them, or is it detrimental to them to wake up the masses in a way to their own power? So the question that I have for you is, do you believe that they just don't do a good job? Or do you believe that them doing a bad job in this particular area is a part of a larger strategy?
So I'm going to answer that with a story. Many years ago when I worked on the Today Show, but I worked in local news at KRON TV in San Francisco, but I used to help do stuff for the Today Show, and my show came on before the Today Show. And one of the things that would happen was when people, but back then it was Bryant Gumbel and Katie Kirk were anchoring the newscast, the Today Show. And every so often when someone would be mad at something, they would call up KRON TV, right? They'd call up their station and yell, I want to speak to Bryant. And I was kind of like, it just doesn't really work like that. And they'd say, well, I was interviewed for a man on the street interview and they didn't use it. And I used to think like, I know you think there's a system that's keeping you out, but actually it's far more likely that the tape just got lost, right? Or the intern forgot to log it, or they really were running out of time. So they logged the first 3 people that they got and you just were number 6. And so I say that to say, I don't think it's about, yes, it's about not serving the bottom line, but I think it's in a different way than you think. I think it's about ratings. Everybody needs to keep their job through ratings, right? So there's no one thinking like, well, what if the story wakes the masses? They're thinking, but you know what? Is it sexy enough? Is it interesting enough? Is it going to be entertaining enough? So in a way, it's a little more stupid than I think you're giving them credit for.
I want to ask a follow-up real quick, Waj, which is this. When I think about sexy, and maybe because I am a political nerd and like cut my teeth, on the Hill and in Washington, D.C., when I see our Capitol building for the first time being breached, which didn't happen during the Civil War, and I'm seeing smoke billow out from the top of it and people building a gallows and calling for the hanging of the Vice President of the United States, what doesn't scream ratings and keeping people's eyeballs to the screen other than that?
That was good ratings, right? That people, we were all glued to that. So the question you're really asking is like, how do we cover that? Right? Because that was an unfolding live event. Those always get great ratings, especially in cable. So then it's in the legal stage, right? And that's the stage that gets a little more complicated, a little more boring, a more talking head. So I'm with you. I actually spent a lot of time trying to talk people into, and I believe it's true, that a lot of these stories that are interesting, just when you get into the nuts and bolts of how something works. So, for example, one of the top-rated shows for Matter of Fact was we flew to Puerto Rico, did an entire show based on the number of people who were trying to get off the grid and get solar power because they knew Puerto Rico's grid was basically useless and so likely to be compromised even in a small storm. Like, if you can't imagine yourself running into a news director's office being like, well, do I have a story for you? The grid in Puerto Rico and how people are getting solar power. Like, it wouldn't work. But our show that had millions, literally 2 million viewers watched a show that was 100% about Puerto Rico and the grid. And so I think there's a misnomer of what actually sells. I think our show has been very successful. And one reason I think is because we do a lot of context, right? We want to explain what most people just don't understand. And I think news skips ahead to the conflict. So yeah, the thing unfolding is insane. We all watched it. But now that it's in the talking head stage, they have a real problem. They think making it entertaining is this yelling congressman versus this yelling congressman, right? So conflict sells. So you get into there's no conflict anymore. It's now down to understanding. And I would argue that conflict certainly can sell, but also people want to understand issues and understand what's at the heart of things. So I'm with you, and I'm not a political nerd at all. And I didn't work on the Hill, and I've been to the Hill with my kids as a tourist, and that's about it. A couple of interviews here and there. But I think we really fail our viewers when we don't try to explain how something happened, and why. We play a game of football, right? It's literally a sport. It is a sport, and you root for sides. And again, I don't think it's because, the masses, if we do this right, the masses will uprise, and so we are going to do it wrong. I think it's just we're lazy and we're cheap, and we don't really understand how people need information. So we'll just do this lame thing. And conflict. People like conflict. Put two people up against each other. This guy should be as far to the left as possible, and this one should be as far to the right as possible. And they'll just yell at each other for 4 minutes. I think you give them more credit when you say, like, they're doing it for a really intentional, thoughtful reason. There is intention, but it's just around, I think this will sell, so we're going to do it. And I think you see that sometimes in movies. Every so often, it's so hard to get a movie made. And then you see a movie that's really like absurdly stupid. And you think, with all the layers that have to go through and hoops to jump, how did this thing get made? And I like kind of stupid movies. So like, I'm not talking about, a lot of super picky. And you just think like that at some point it was just this, no one really tried. It was just lame and lazy. And it's almost hard to get across. But, people, I think, don't really understand what works for a market. And certainly I've seen that in my entire career in news.
Yeah.
Me and Danielle are going to fight at the end. We're taking bets right now. It's going to be an MMA fight. I can only use judo, and then Danielle can only use chokehold. So just put in your bets right now because we need the ratings. When it comes to, we're talking about spectacle, we're talking about sensationalism. We're talking about this type of sports race, while we're talking about the defense of democracy that is under attack, Soledad, right now, literally as we speak. And a large part of this cannot be singularly blamed, but the shift really for CNN was the introduction of Zucker as president. He's since left, right? He's been replaced by Chris Licht. And John Malone is a shareholder, and we've talked about this, where they've openly said, we have to play by the middle. We have to court Republicans. I am a CNN alum. I remember I was there for a year right before the pandemic. And what people don't realize oftentimes is in the green room, and what really bothered me about this, and I just want you to talk to us about behind the scene, how this it gets cooked, the meal gets cooked. What really bothered me was, I was always civil to the people I had to go debate about my worth as a human being, as a Muslim during the Muslim ban. I was always nice. We were told always to talk about families. I'm like, fine. I drank my Coke. I don't raise my voice. I was good to everyone, professional. Many of the Trump supporters in the green room, we found out, hated Trump. They're all frauds for the most part, right? Then we'd get on TV. It'd be, like you said, left, right? And I'm sitting here thinking, this is not a left-right issue. We're talking about the defense of democracy. What's happening, right? But it was allegedly good for ratings. And now we're seeing literally CNN in the crosshairs of MAGA. They want to kill CNN employees. And CNN says, you know what? We're going to court you Republicans and kiss your butt. Can you explain and the thing is this, I know you're a former CNN employee. I was there for a year, and I'm going to just go out and say this, guys. I've always said this publicly. I had a great time at CNN. People were nice to me. I respect a lot of folks that work there. No bitter grapes. I had my 1 year. I just want them to do better. That's why I'm critical. But explain to me how this gets cooked behind the scenes when it comes to political coverage, especially in this moment. And I believe you might share my frustration because I read your tweets.
I love that you say cook the meal, where the rest of us would say how the sausage is made. But I totally understand.
I'm a Muslim. I'm the Muslim.
That's what's making me laugh. There's a whole other way to think about it, because who wants to know about how the sausage is made? If you're a Muslim, you wouldn't care about how the sausage is made. So I think that, what in a way, you sound naive to me, because this is how it's not just who the network books. It pays you money It pays you money to think one thing and to say another, right? There's no version. Anybody who goes on television and says, well, that's a really thoughtful question. It's kind of nuanced, so let me explain a little, right? Boom, done. They'll never be booked again. Boring. Again, like that doesn't people believe. There's no ratings in that. And so, and I know I've had friends who, a friend of mine is a principal, right? And they'll call them up and say, hey, we need a person who's going to say, the teacher should be fired because we have the other side where the teacher should blah, 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 right? And he's like, well, it's much more complicated than that. I mean, the teacher might be fired, or maybe he should be fired, right? It's just but you need the people who are going to speak in these absolutes to make that debate better. And if you want to get paid, then you better deliver, or they will find somebody else. When I left CNN, I was asked to go on Chris Matthews' show on MSNBC, talk about Fidel Castro had died, talk about Fidel Castro. So I did a lot of reporting in Cuba. And it was always interesting to me that, and my mom is Cuban, that people who really hated Castro in a lot of ways also were mourning his death, like in a big way. It was like very contradictory. So right before I went on, probably a minute before, they said in my ear, oh, you're going to be on with Jose Diaz-Balart. And I was just like, I was going to be up against Jose Diaz. I'm like up against, like I'm just, and so like that's the mindset. So one, that's an ambush. It's not okay to set people up. I like Jose, fine. I mean, I don't know him very well, but so he came out and his take was dictators are bad, which you realize leaves me the take of dictators are good.
Well, actually, Jose.
My mother left Cuba when Castro came into power. She left for good and really not to go back. So to live. So so I was like, oh, this is a terrible. And I was trying to explain, like, to understand for a lot of Black Cubans, right? Castro's coming improve their lives in some way and also wreck their lives in lots of ways, right? It's very complicated. Batista bad, Castro bad, dictators bad. Let me be clear. And I just kept saying to him, like, I agree with you. We agree. And I never went on that again, obviously, but also I never, I understand what they were going for, right? Which is like two people fighting. And it as opposed to educating people, like there's 400,000 Cubans in this square mourning a guy whom, if you went and asked them individually, they would say, he has ruined Cuba. We love America. We would love a relationship with America. So explain that to me. Explain the contradiction. Okay, you don't have to learn. I kept saying, do you want me to explain this thing? And they just, no. They wanted a fight to fill that 5 minutes. And so I think you have to be willing. I wasn't being paid, but as you know, a lot of the contributors are paid, right? You understand you're not going to be invited back if you don't come and say, yes, I will take this side. I hate Trump, but I know the talking points are this, 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 and this. I love Trump, but I know the talking points are this, 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 and this, right? Like they understand the game, and it's a game, and it's a game that pays pretty well. That gig can pay, minimum $100,000 for a year, which is a good chunk of change, and you get on a lot. It's a good way to pitch your book or whatever you're working on. So I think it's naive to think that people think of it anything other than like it's a good platform to get to the next thing that they want to get to.